Holly has decided to lay right behind my chair. Okay, all right. Welcome to HortTube. My name is Jim Putnam. This is the question and answer video that I do most Sundays. You can ask gardening questions down below this video, and I pick from those each week. I've written down 20, 21, something like that. I try to write down ones that are kind of relevant to whatever's going on now, and then, some of them are just being asked super frequently at that time, for whatever reason. On the Learn to Garden video series that I have over on my website, that I've said is going to be about 60 hours of content, just, basically from garden design through implementing, planting, maintaining, all things gardening in one space that doesn't have commercials on it like YouTube. There's a discount code below the video for that. The video that went up on there this week is all about pruners. So I've been doing a lot of pruning videos on the channel, and I went through and did a video on, I pulled out all my pruning implements, my implements of destruction, and went through how to use each one and why you'd want to own or not own each of the different types of pruners, from chainsaws and hand saws and bypass pruners and loppers and tree pruners, and have one or more of everything. And so I just pulled them all out and went through them and showed how to use them and that kind of thing. So that video's gone up on there, and it just kind of matches all the pruning videos that I've been putting up on the main channel. So like pruning this abelia back here and other things that I've been pruning. It's bright and sunny over here. It's supposed to be cloudy, and it's supposed to rain later, so I'm shooting this video, and the sun may be kind of all over the place while I'm doing it, but that's life. So let's get to some questions from this past week. Again, great questions. Thanks for participating. And just in the comments down below, your comment is the question. Some people will ask me in the comments where to ask the question. That's where you ask the question, is just your comment is the question, or is where you put the question. Let's see. So somebody, I think had asked this question last week as well, and then I just didn't see it when I went to write down the questions about transplanting plants in a truck bed. I have a ton of experience with this. This is one of the, I did this probably, I had a space at the Raleigh Farmers Market for years, and sometimes you just didn't need a full truck, and so I just used my pickup. I just got a full-size pickup truck, and the way most of the time we went about it is we would put the plants in the bed as close to the cab as you can, and then lay them down so that the pot is closer to the cab, so the wind blows across the plant, not into the plant, but kind of under the plant and back. And we would stack them. I can put up 93 gallon plants in a pickup truck all day long. Just stack it from the bottom to 3 or 4 feet above the bed, and then we use basically a shade cloth. So you can get a greenhouse shade cloth that's like 50% shade. That's about the perfect amount. I don't like to cover them in plastic because that plastic can just beat them to death. You really need some of that air to actually move through the cover, and so the cover is breaking up the wind some, but it's allowing some through, and it's not really thrashing the plants all that much. The hotter the day, the more damage you could potentially do to the plants that you're transplanting in the back of a pickup. So cool days, rainy days, cloudy days, which this one was supposed to be, are the best days to transplant plants in the back of pickups. But again, having them, if you only have a few plants just close to the cab, is fine. If you have more than that, you can get them as close to the cab and then lay them down with the top of the plant facing toward the back of the truck. If you have some sort of shade cloth, that's great. Plants in full bloom are going to be very vulnerable to the flowers being blown off the plants, and so a lot of the times when I was stacking plants in a pickup, I would put the blooming things on the bottom so that the evergreen or foliage things were on top of that. Another thing that could lead to some damage in this way is if they have a lot of new growth. That new super tender growth is going to be a lot more vulnerable to wind damage. Again, the sun is just moving in and out of the clouds back here. That new tender growth is going to be a lot more vulnerable to that type of damage. So yes, I've probably moved more plants in pickups than almost anybody. It's something I'm very good at, and back to my landscape days, without having any damage on them. But keep in mind, They are definitely more vulnerable back there, and on super hot days, I would probably avoid having them in any kind of open pickup. But if you're going to be moving lots of plants in a pickup, I definitely get a shade cloth, a 50% shade cloth that's big enough. So if my bed is 8 foot this way and 5 or 6 feet this way, I actually have a cover that's about 10 feet wide and about 20 feet long. It's, that's a giant cover, and it allows me to have a generous cover to go over everything. And then I just either use the weight of the pots to hold the cover in place, or I have some nails that I'll use to attach them. But long answer, but super easy, but you have to be thinking about what you're doing. If you put, I frequently go down the interstate and see 5 shrubs right at the back of the tailgate on a pickup, just being beat to death riding down the road. And you can imagine the amount of water that's being taken out of those leaves as they're driving along. Really hard to get that water back up to the top. So that's where that burn is going to occur. Somebody has butterfly bushes that consistently die over in Tennessee. They're zone 7. And they have butterfly bushes are weird in that if they get zapped with cold and wind before they're dormant, you can frequently get cracking down toward the base, and so that's probably what's happening on yours. Weirdly, butterfly bushes are actually easier to grow in nurseries in the north than they are in the south, because in the south frequently they don't go to sleep in the wintertime in a container, and then they get whacked by cold and actually freeze and crack down at the base, whereas in the north they can get cold, stay cold, the plant stays dormant through the winter. So that's probably what's happening, is they're not fully getting to sleep before they wake up. If it continued to happen, I would just probably not be growing them. You may be in a very exposed place that's just more vulnerable to it. But that's probably, if you'll examine them down near the base, you'll probably see some cracking in the wood. And what that is there was water still up in the stem, and then the water froze. And remember, it's that water expands, which can crack that wood. And it also, looks like, if you look at ice under a microscope like that, it looks like little needles. So it's like death by 1,000 needles from inside the plant. There are a lot of plants that are actually susceptible to that. My Farfugium, that's how that thing goes to the ground every winter. It never stops growing until we get super cold, and then the water that's up in the stems freezes it and explodes it. But somehow it's able to come back from the roots, where a more woody butterfly bush sometimes won't. Sometimes will and sometimes won't. But that's probably what's going on, is they're just cracking down at the bottom. And again, open spaces in the wind are probably going to be more likely to have the temperature drop quicker. Let's see. Somebody has Star of Bethlehem bulbs, wants to know how to eliminate them. This is one of those delicate looking spring bulbs that you would think is no big deal, but they can really take over a landscape. Bad in Europe, bad here. One that I would definitely avoid ever planting. With something like that might be one that I'd actually think about using a herbicide on. I don't talk about chemicals very often on the channel, but maybe painting a herbicide of some kind on that foliage when it's up will help kill those. Otherwise, they almost need to be dug out. They were thinking maybe they could just cut them back before they flower each time, and would that help? Yes, it'd probably slow them down to deny them the ability to make food and to rebuild the food in that bulb every year, and you would probably reduce them over some period of time. But man, that would probably be a very slow process. And so my thought would be, while the foliage is up on them, you can just if they're in a bed with other things and you can't spray, you can just paint herbicide on the individual plants with a paintbrush and a glove. That's one option. Or get like that Pro Plugger that you've seen me use, that I can, that I use to dig bulbs into the ground. You can actually dig bulbs out of the ground with that thing too. So while they're up and you can see where they are, you can just pop them, and just dig them out of the ground, and just make sure you're disposing of that bulb. That bulb has a lot of stored food, probably enough for 2 seasons. If something went wrong with it, it could probably still produce enough energy to produce a small amount of growth in a flower that next year to rebuild itself again. So herbicide or dig them out. I hate to say, anything, along those lines, but sometimes, these invasive plants, you know, you really have to get after them and get after them hard and really go after them hard one season, whichever one of those you prefer to use. Okay, so this one, somebody asked, they're planting a honeysuckle, and honeysuckles can be vulnerable to honeysuckle aphids. Wanted to know if planting nasturtiums near them would help with that. There's this theory that planting nasturtiums in a garden will draw aphids away from other things. And of course, it's been copied and pasted enough times on the internet that somehow there's some truth to it, and maybe it's nasturtiums get get aphids as well, but nasturtiums typically get aphids, I think, because people are over fertilizing them. I've said this many times: over fertilizing things make things more vulnerable. Not a single one of these things about nasturtiums helping with keep aphids off of other things is on a .edu document. It's not from a university. It's from some gardener that wrote it, and then someone else may have had it. They thought it helped them in some way, and then they've copied it and pasted it. And I'm not saying these things are 100% wrong, but they're highly unlikely. First of all, that honeysuckle aphid attacks mostly just Lonicera things, so anything in the Lonicera family, which is honeysuckle vines, or Lonicera nitida, which is the boxleaf honeysuckle. So it wouldn't even be an aphid that would probably get on your nasturtium anyway. Okay, so it wouldn't be helpful in that regard. Probably, your honeysuckle's getting aphids typically because it's under some sort of stress. Same thing with the things in your vegetable garden that you'd be putting nasturtiums out to help with. Most of the time, these aphid-related issues are plant stress. And so that plant stress can come from over-fertilizing them, pushing them too hard. It could come from something being in more shade than it would like. It could come from it just doesn't like the environment it's in, and so it's stressed in some other way. It's putting out a stress signal into the world, and then the aphids are able to set up shop on them. A lot of our aphid problems could be we don't have enough birds in the landscape, to be taking care of them when you do get them, because you are going to get aphids here and there. You are going to have stressed plants, that are vulnerable to it, regardless of, how much you're pushing them or not pushing them. So, but again, I think this nasturtium thing about putting nasturtiums out here to draw aphids to them and basically be sacrificial plants for your other things in the landscape is probably not something that actually works. Of course, somebody's going to tell me down, it works great. It works great. And then that doesn't even factor in that there are different types of aphids for different types of plants, which again, with that honeysuckle aphid, is that. So no, I don't think it will do you any good. If you're getting aphids on your honeysuckle, think about, is it in too much shade? Is it staying too dry, too wet? It's got some other stress on it, perhaps. And you may or may not have them. They were actually about to plant it, so you may or may not have aphids on it anyway. But the nasturtium won't help with that particular problem. But I do know where these types of rumors, do persist on the internet quite a bit. Hope I explained it. Hope I explained that well. There are different kinds of aphids for different kinds of things, and most of your aphid problems are from plant stress. And you got to figure out what that stress is. It may be that the plant just doesn't want to grow in your area of the country because it's too hot, too cold, too whatever, as well. So let's see. Somebody in general, asking about pruning of the timing of pruning perennials. I put up a perennial pruning video this past week on the channel, pruning back a lot of my herbaceous perennials. I'm probably doing that a little bit early just to show you guys, but typically you'd wait more toward the time they're about to start putting on some new growth. So that would be any of your perennial grasses, rudbeckia, coneflowers, whatever it is, the standing perennials that you've left through the winter. You want to be pruning them back about the time new growth is going to start, because it becomes more and more difficult when new growth comes up into the old growth to prune them. But as long as you can wait. Okay. Then somebody just put down a question. Oh, no. Let me do this one first. Somebody asked when and how to move a big boxwood, and then there was another moving boxwood question. If it's an old established boxwood, I would go out and root prune it, which I've talked about on moving plants before, just making a ring around it of cutting the roots. And then I probably would go ahead and do a little bit of pruning on it too. So you've reduced the size of the root ball. Let's reduce the top just a bit. So I would go out and root prune it now, and then I'd move it sometime during the early spring, 4, 6 weeks from now, something like that, and make sure it's reestablished itself, but if you reduce the top on it, when you reduce the roots, it should eliminate a lot of the stress of moving it during the spring, and you won't have as much stress on it during the summer. If you take the whole big top of the plant but reduce the root ball down by 50% and don't do a little pruning on the top, it will potentially, that plant's kind of out of balance and will require a little more paying attention to it. But if you do both, prune the roots, prune the top, 5 or 6 weeks from now, go ahead and move it. I doubt you'll, probably won't miss a beat. Let's see, what the next one was. Somebody just, I don't know I don't even know if this was a question, but it says, why to get rid of henbit or chickweed? Is it for having a monoculture lawn? I don't think I said anything about getting rid of henbit or chickweed in last week's video. So I don't know where that came from, but I do get rid of all my henbit and chickweed in the beds because it seeds itself rather quickly. Same thing in the vegetable garden. And you will have henbit and chickweed like you can't control. In terms of lawn, spraying things in lawns and treating the lawn for different things, I hand weed that little front piece of turf up there. This one I'm just letting it, whatever happens, happens. But I'm not a big fan of monoculture lawns and spraying, But yes, if you are spraying henbit and chickweed in your lawns, it's to get, to have a monoculture of the same type of thing in that space. But in your beds, you definitely want to be getting rid of it. It will, it can produce a lot of seed very quickly, and it's about to happen right now. And I've got a little bit of henbit back here in the vegetable garden that I showed in a video, still haven't gotten rid of, but I need to do it quick because that seed, those things can produce so much seed. And then the next year be even worse. Okay, let's see. There's a constant list of questions. I could probably find 15 or 20 questions related to removing invasives and controlling Bermuda grass and zoysia grass and centipede grass from creeping into beds. And it's always the same answer. It's going to be, you have to, get on top of them, stay on top of them, dig them out, digging out ivy, digging out bamboo, digging out, anything that's being a bully in your garden, and then staying on top of it. These creeping grasses going into beds, it's just is what it is. You got to put some sort of physical barrier between them that's tall enough to stop it, or you have to, every week when you mow, take the weed eater around and, knock it back, which is what I do with the zoysia grass out there in the front. I mow it, and because it's such a tiny little space, it takes me 5 minutes to mow it, and then I take an electric weed eater out there and I turn it on its side and I keep that grass from creeping out. It still gets out a bit, but and then I just have to stay on top of it. There's nothing but hard work to take care of those things. And I'd rather just not have them be part of the garden. But this person had zoysia, and I had one person that had zoysia and Bermuda creeping into their beds. Eventually your zoysia will be Bermuda anyway, because Bermuda's a bully in zoysia as well. It can even bully the bullies, which is kind of which is kind of amazing. But literally it's the answer to all of those questions. There is no shortcut. And then I think there was another one about coming up about ivy once it gets up in the trees. I've got to cut it out of a tree back here that's not even on this property, back here behind me, because the seed, now it's raining seeds from above me because it's climbing a tree. It's not too late. Ivy can stay on a tree for years and years. There's probably one in the background back here on another property back there. It can stay on a tree for a long time without killing the tree. But the sooner you can just go, all you have to do is cut it right down at the base, and it kills what's up in the tree. Just be careful that you're not sawing and hurting the tree at the same time. Identify what is ivy and what is bark on the tree, and then cut them individually, and you'll see it quickly die up in the canopy. It's going to try to climb right back up if you don't kill it around the base though. So again, there is no answer to any of those things other than hard work. Even if you're using a herbicide, you're going to have to use a herbicide frequently, right? I mean, there's every one of these answers, no matter what system or technique you're using, is keep working at it, and hopefully you reduce it. Unfortunately, you'll never reduce battling Bermuda grass against your beds, without a physical barrier or, killing the Bermuda grass completely. Just no good answer to it. So somebody has an osmanthus, they want to prune it up into a tree form eventually, wanted to know if they should just go, it's only 5 feet tall now, should they go ahead and start limbing it up even now? It's an interesting question because I think bonsai folks would tell you that you would leave limbs in place because it's actually gaining energy for the plant, helping it establish a root system. It's got, it's producing food for the plant, which is helping the plant grow faster, even if you're eventually going to take that limb off. So bonsai people will leave limbs on, knowing that eventually that limb is coming off for this exact same reason. With that said, 1 or 2 limbs at the bottom of your osmanthus, I just go ahead and cut them off. So with all that said, yes, probably leaving that branch on is going to cause it to grow, this much faster, but, at the end of the day, if you want to go out there and cut them off, it's not going to hurt. It's not going to hurt it, and it's probably not going to slow it down that much. Okay, there you go. Let's see. Somebody wants a fast-growing evergreen shrub under their crepe myrtle. They got a single crepe myrtle, Natchez crepe myrtle. They've got some space along a fence behind it or around it. They want some sort of evergreen to kind of block the fence a bit underneath it. Any kind of, like Chinese holly, like Carissa holly or even dwarf Burford holly would compete with it. You got a root competition issue with your, with the crepe myrtle. So, but any native shrub like Yopon holly, dwarf Yopon holly, would work well with it. I don't know how shady it is underneath it at this point. Probably not that shady if it's not a giant one already. Elysium would probably work, but initially they kind of will get wilty. But once they're established, they're very drought tolerant. So there's a lot of different options. One thing I'm going to tell you though is if your crepe myrtle gets stressed at some point, it will get aphids because and then the honeydew from those aphids will drip down on any evergreen shrub that's underneath it and turn the leaves on them black. And so if you think you've had any aphid problems on that crepe myrtle, then keep in mind the evergreen shrubs have the potential underneath it to turn black. I might even almost use deciduous shrubs underneath it. Weigelia, I don't care. It doesn't matter what it is. Some sort of hydrangea, something else that loses its leaves in the winter, and then you could clean all that up a bit if you do have aphid issues. But almost every crepe myrtle that I see in the landscape that is underplanted with evergreen things, if it's any kind of stressful situation for that tree, it has aphids, and then you get that sooty mold. The mold, it's mold on aphid poo or aphid secretion. It's the sugary stuff from the aphids, and then it's a mold, and it's very unappealing on the plants below them. So somebody has said, how do I keep the Joe Pye weed from spreading? You can deadhead them before the seed is set. So after they bloom, if you're worried about it setting seed, it can colonize, but it colonizes slower than it seeds itself. So if you're worried about one of the native plants like that seeding itself and getting kind of crazy, because our native plants are very good at taking space if they can get it, then you can, after they flower, before it's fully formed seed, you can just cut the seed heads off of it if you want to. That's one option. You can't really control it from suckering, but most of these cultivars sucker pretty slow. They go to sleep with maybe 3 upright stems and come back with 6 or 7, but it's not that bad. It's not that hard to control. But any of your perennials that have the potential to seed themselves, you can just cut the seed heads off after before they form the seed fully to help control them. But a lot of our native plants, have the ability to be pretty aggressive in the garden. Let's see. Somebody they have a slight slope in their front yard. They want to do some planting. Was wondering if they needed to do a retaining wall because they're worried about erosion. I think part of that is the type of mulch you use. I've talked about using mulch that has different size pieces, so that's why I use the triple shredded hardwood mulch, because it wraps on itself pretty well. If you have a slope, you definitely don't want to use something like pine bark mini nuggets or nuggets, because they float like crazy. Even wood chips, if you were using wood chips, can float in that situation. Although I would use wood chips probably to prep the area. If it's a slight slope, I don't think you need any kind of retaining wall. You just want to pick mulch, which can be pine. It can even be pine straw, because it does a pretty good job of holding in place. Not 100%. Nothing holds itself in place 100%, but better than other options. And then plant things, on it, as quick as you can go, and plant a lot of, plant herbaceous perennials, native perennials that can root pretty deep, and grasses do great for that. Ornamental grasses are a great choice for keeping the soil in place, keeping the soil from moving. So you can do that down toward the bottom using small ornamental grasses, and then, the tree roots and, the roots of your shrubs and things will help with all that. And as fast as you can get that done, the better. Ground covers will help with any erosion. So you don't have to build a retaining wall. And a lot of times for me, and this is a person who made money for years building retaining walls out of natural materials. Never built retaining walls out of the concrete blocks like most walls are now. The engineered walls. I never used the engineered walls. I always use natural materials. Even natural materials in places can look out of place. And so just like a straight line of a retaining wall across your front garden can be hard to then, make look natural, from there. So if it's just a slight slope for me, I'm not going to do that. You can place some larger boulders and rocks in it, toward the bottom, that can help divert water and, but still, still have a natural look to it. I don't know. Let's see. But a slight slope, I'm not going to build or go spend thousands on a retaining wall. Let's see. Somebody asked about jump starting canna lilies now. So they bought some canna lilies. It's too early to put them in the ground. Can they jump start them, keep them in an unheated greenhouse? Yeah. And I'll put up some sort of jump starting video pretty soon with all the things that I'll jump start. And that could be elephant ears and cannas and, even potatoes are one thing that I could go ahead and start in a windowsill right now. And lots and lots of things that we can get started on early and have them decent sized dahlias before we put them in the ground. So somebody asked about fruit tree pruning advice. It was an espaliered apple. They wanted to do some pruning on it and asked me if I had any advice. My advice always on pruning fruit in your area is to call your extension agent for your county. Everybody watching me has a county extension agent, usually runs the Master Gardener program in your county as well. They can probably tell you when, like NC State will hold a session on fruit tree pruning during the winter time to show how to prune peaches and plums and apples and maintain those kinds of things. But they do field days for these kinds of things. And somewhere near you, there's an ag school, and you can get information on this. I'm just not an authority on it in any way, shape, or form, but there are people who do fruit tree research, in your state and teach farmers how to do it, and they're happy to teach, anybody to do it. That's what their role is in the extension programs. But it's all over the country. It's definitely a tool and a resource to use, especially, again, that question I got last week about having plants in Texas, and me saying that look around your area, see what's thriving right now. Your extension agent, might be another resource for that as well. Let's see. And then I talked about last week about being a good neighbor and not planting ivy on the property line, so it ends up in your neighbor's garden or vinca or, one of those things. And then somebody said they had planted a star jasmine and wondered if it would get into their neighbor's stuff. That's a very fast-growing vine, but it doesn't tend to root in. It doesn't really travel across the ground. It's going to have to kind of climb on things. So it's something that could be taken care of in minutes, to clean it up and cut it back. So not one that I would worry about, really. But again, it's just really those kind of known, vinca and English ivy probably a few more I could come up with. Bamboo, that can drive you make your neighbor have to work hours and hours and hours a year to maintain their space, from something you planted. But that star jasmine should be fine. So let's see, I answered the ivy growing up the tree question. Just cut it off at the base, and then you need to try to pull it up from around it as well. But just cutting it at the base will kill the part that's up in the tree. A few weeks later, you can come back and kind of pull on those vines, put some gloves on, and maybe a hard hat, and you can usually dislodge those vines from up in the tree. It might not be that it works in a week. It might not be that it works in 3 weeks, but sometime in time, you'll be able to pull those things out of that tree. Okay, so somebody asked how long to wait. They put down a layer of wood chips, like I've talked about many times. Wanted to know how long to wait to start planting in it. I would say about 6 months should be about right. If it's still super, super chunky, you might want to pull it back a little bit when you're planting, just to make sure you're not dropping a lot of that material down into the native soil. But I would think that within 6 months, 8 months for sure, most of it'll be broken down enough that you can start planting, and it won't be stealing, won't be needing so much nitrogen at that point while it's breaking down. Somebody they bought marginally hardy shrubs for their area. They've kept them all winter, kept them acclimated to the outside. So they did what I said. They haven't just put them inside and let them be inside. They've actually brought them out on warmer days, so they're acclimated to their temperatures. Wanted to know when to plant them. I'd probably still wait until near your average last frost date. I would hate to tell somebody right now to put something in, and then, we just had 21 degrees. Yesterday we had the record high for that day at 70. 3 or 4 nights before that, we had a 21 degree night. So we can still get some, we've still got several weeks where we could have wildly below normal temperatures. So I would probably wait. For me, that's going to be about April 15th, and I'm still looking at the calendar at that point, even though they're acclimated. And I've always said, make sure the plant's acclimated to your area when you're putting it in the ground this time of year. If they're marginal plants in your area, I might even go beyond that and say wait till you're frost-free, or your average last frost date. Okay, and the last question for this week, somebody says they usually use 10-10-10 to fertilize, and I don't know what they're talking about fertilizing. I don't know if they're talking about their turf or their shrubs or what they're talking about, but they have some leftover fertilizer and they want to use that instead. They have some 34-10 and some 12-6-6. So I don't know what they're even fertilizing. So I'm going to address this from a couple different things. So I'll answer your question about using Old Fertilizer. Old Fertilizer can sweat in the bag, and if it's a slow release fertilizer, which I'm guessing a 34-10, because the 30 is nitrogen. The first number is nitrogen, the second number is phosphorus, the third number is potassium. Okay, then the 3 numbers on the fertilizer, and then you have micronutrients in the fertilizer, typically in small amounts. So this 34-10, 30% of that bag, of the weight of that bag, is nitrogen. Okay, I'm guessing that's a slow release fertilizer, because it'd be awful scary fertilizer if it dumped 30% nitrogen immediately. If you have an old bag of slow release fertilizer with that 30 number, if that bag has sweated inside and it's no longer a granular, it feels a little moist, or it's sticking together some, the coating on that fertilizer could be gone, and you would be throwing out 30% nitrogen that would instantly could potentially burn lots of your plants in the landscape. So that's my caution on old slow release fertilizers with high nitrogen contents like that. Is if it looks like it's sweated in the bag or it's sticking together, be super. I probably wouldn't use it, or I would use it and just use 10% of what the application rate is, and just get rid of it over some period of time. So you can still use it, but you'd be putting down a 3 instead of a 30 if you were putting down 10%, if that makes any sense. You'd only be putting down 3 pounds of nitrogen per, whatever. Okay. The 12-6-6 I probably wouldn't be as scared of. And then, I don't know why. So 10-10-10 is a fertilizer that's been around, since I was a kid. This is what we used to fertilize our gardens back then. Back in the day, everybody used 10-10-10, just threw it out by hand. It was inexpensive. It's actually gotten kind of pricey over the years, honestly. you don't really need these high, this much nitrogen. You probably don't need this much phosphorus, and you probably don't need this much potassium on things. What we know, if you got a soil test and your phosphorus was low, maybe I would use something that has, 10% of the bag is phosphorus, maybe even 20% of the bag is phosphorus. But phosphorus tends to be fairly stable in the soil, meaning that if you get it to the right number, then it doesn't fall very quickly. So if you continue to throw it out, twice a season, forever and ever and ever, you will eventually build up numbers on some of these things that are too high and can bind up other nutrients. And this is why I'm only feeding plants with compost, leaves and mulch and organic material and sticks and limbs and cuttings and pieces off the plants and then and a little bit of organic fertilizer. This is why I fertilize that way, because any of these other things eventually will reach a tipping point, where it's too much. Also, fertilizing with these high nitrogen things again can make plants vulnerable to insect issues. So to answer your question, I'd be cautious with old fertilizers. If they're slow release fertilizers, they may no longer be slow release, and 100% of it will hit the ground running and could burn your plants. But then also, I'd like to, get you just to think about, fertilizing your vegetables and other things using compost and the cuttings from your own plants and mulches and things like that, and do it that way, because most likely the soil has what it needs. We just need to get that soil life awake and helping those plants out. So thank you guys for following along. Ask gardening questions down below, and I'll be back next week with another one.